This piece has a prologue. James? This statue is in the Prado Museum in Madrid. It was made in about 10 AD, and it's in the Roman section of the Prado, which is a section that I really love. I lived in Madrid for about 1 year. And if you go to the Prado Museum, which is this big long rectangle, you enter at one side, and if you go downstairs into the depths of the Prado, basically the basement galleries, and you start making your way back that rectangle, then there's going to be a fork. And if you go left at this fork, which everyone else will be doing, then you will end up in the deep cavern of despair and God, which are Goya's black paintings, which I have no time to go into today, so I'm not going to. But if for once in your life you do not go left with everyone else to Goya's black paintings, and you instead go right at this fork, then you will enter the Roman section of the Prado. And at the back of the Roman section, in a circular gallery under rather dim lighting, these two gentlemen will be waiting for you. And the first time that I saw this statue, which was about my 9th time at the Prado, I literally burst out laughing out loud because of how perfect I found it and still find it, and how moved I was. And the guard looked at me strangely because I was a person alone in a museum laughing, but I just had to laugh for some reason. And so I wrote Jerome an email that had a photo of this statue in it. Something to note is that during the year I lived in Madrid, I was obviously separated from Jerome. And then incidentally, right when I moved back from Madrid to New York, Jerome then went on a Fulbright for a year to live in Brazil. And that is to say that this time, this period of 2 years, was new and different. Because for the 7 or 8 years before I moved to Madrid, Jerome and I in New York had been unbelievably inseparable, or believably inseparable. But we literally spent all of our time together. Our shared mental conversational life was constantly vocalized between us. We were at least once a week wandering together through the halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art together. And so, this time, when I lived in Madrid, was new, and it was hard, and it was lonely. And so I would go to the Prado Museum every single Thursday night during the 2 free hours each day as this kind of ritual that I just emotionally needed. And the 9th time that I did this, I found this statue. And I laughed in the gallery, and then I went home in the dark, and I sent an email to Jerome with a photo of this in it. There was no subject line, there was no text. Only thing in the body of the email was this photo. And 7 minutes later, I got an email from Jerome back telling me that he had laughed when he opened the email and had to reel back from his computer screen because of how moved he was by this statue. And that made me feel really good. So, the placard at the Prado Museum will tell you that this statue is a statue of Orestes and Pylades. Pylades is Orestes' bud. And it will also tell you that this statue depicts a moment when Orestes and Pylades have just returned back from a years-long journey they had to go on in order to steal a statue of the goddess Artemis, whom we see cowering behind Orestes' left leg there in the corner. And they had to bring the statue back to Orestes' hometown and make a sacrifice to the statue, and thus to Artemis, all in order to break a spell of madness that had fallen on Orestes for years, put on him by the Furies, because he had killed his mother at the bidding of his sister Electra. The important thing in all of this is that Pylades here had gone on this years-long journey to cure his friend of madness. And it's not actually super clear which is which, but most art historians agree that Orestes is the one on our right, because he's the one making the sacrifice. That's what's happening with that torch there, by the way. He's making a burnt offering on a little pedestal. And Pylades here, well, honestly, the both of them I find have a posture that is quite lazy for such a significant moment in their lives, truly, and also, I do observe in the midst of that laziness a certain solemnity, brought, I think, in no small part by that statue of Artemis there in the corner, who is heartbreakingly serious. And if you ever get to see the statue up close, you can see that Artemis is just holding an egg carefully against her breast. But additionally, if I look at Pylades, I see that he doesn't seem to be paying much attention to the sacrifice. He's looking at something in his right hand. Some art historians say that maybe there once would have been a mirror in Pylades' hand that he's looking at. Some people say maybe he's reading an incantation. Let's all just take a quick moment to recognize it looks like he's scrolling through his iPhone. I wish we were above that, but we are not, and we are not going to leave that thought behind for the rest of the show. But what matters to me here is that Pylades is distracted. And I think I recognize this look of distraction, and I want to talk about it a little bit. I also observe that Pylades has his hips swung out to the side in a divinely careless fashion, and that both of the young men at this important moment have fancifully thrown back a leg behind them in such a way that I, as an Italian, believe only an Italian could have possibly made this statue. But if you look at it, because of the way that Pylades has thrown out his hips, and because of the fact that he is basically standing on a few toes, that means if you look, if we could actually get a close-up up here, if we look, we see that Pylades' wrist would be quite heavy on Orestes' shoulder and neck because of the amount of weight that he is throwing over in that direction. But Pylades' fingers, which are touching Orestes' more sensitive chest, are much more careful and specific with that part of his friend's body. In such a way that the sculptor, obviously, is being very specific here, but also Pylades is practicing some really high-level friend artistry in this moment. And it seems to me that it is in fact Pylades' hand that is speaking to Orestes. And what that hand is saying via the ear of Orestes' chest is, I'm with you. I'm here. I'm not being solemn the way that you're being solemn right now, and I'm not really paying attention to what you're doing, and I'm not taking part in this sacrifice that you need to make that I do not need to make, but no, I'm here. And I'm leaning on you for weight. Now, speaking of weight, I also observe when I look at this statue that I do not actually think that two men could stand with their hips thrown out and their feet up on only a couple of toes leaning on each other without falling down. And in my memory, the statue in Madrid, in fact, leans forward quite aggressively. And then I observe that this is, of course, possible because a good portion of the weight of the statue is going down through Orestes' right arm, through this torch, and that these two men are being held up in part by the sacrifice that they are making together. And so it made me feel really good when Jerome told me that he laughed at the image of this statue, because laughter is a huge part of our spiritual life in museum spaces. I have laughed more with Jerome in museums, cumulatively, statistically, than I have laughed in any other space on Earth. That is undeniably true. And it is not a laughter of levity, it is not a laughter of mockery, it is quite grounded. It is a laughter that I think says, I have to give something up to the level of virtue I see displayed here before me. And the last thing that I will say about this statue is that I've had a lot of friends over the course of my life who were as close as a sibling for a year or 2 years, and then who went away from me because I couldn't handle them changing into a new kind of person. But Jerome and I have managed to stay close these 12 years and counting, because I think we are always trying to find new ways to be patient with each other when one of us has to go on some journey, has to steal some statue of Artemis, has to bring it back, and to be with that friend while they make whatever sacrifice they need to make to break a spell of madness that has fallen on them for years at a time, perhaps.
I first started making this piece, which is an art lecture, a personal essay and musical composition all in one when I was living in Salvador. Brazil. I lived there for 9 months. I had received a Fulbright grant as a composer, and the project I proposed when I applied for this grant was to study samba and to write new music alongside my studies. And when I applied for it, I was super interested in doing this project. But by the time I got to Salvador, my interest had shifted, as they are wont to do, so I did not study samba. I studied instead art history and poetry. I did write some music. I swam in the Baía de Todos os Santos, the Bay of All Saints. And even though I became very good friends with my neighbor, a young filmmaker, as well as the family from whom I rented an apartment, my existence in Salvador was monk-like. I lived at the top of a hill overlooking a valley in solitude, reading and writing in silence. And the original form this piece took was a series of slideshows I made on my computer and recorded scores for and emailed to my friend James. And James emailed me back materials of his own, like a video talking about Orestes and Pylades, as we just saw. And when I was in Brazil, I spent a lot of time on the website of the Metropolitan Museum of Art back here in New York. And a lot of the images in these slideshows were taken from that website. So, in this first section, we will see objects from the Polynesian Gallery at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. One day, while I was living in Salvador, I decided to make ink. ink ever before. I was curious. I had this book with recipes for making pigments and inks. And there was one recipe that called for the pits of apricots, peaches, or plums. Apricots and peaches, I didn't know where to get in Salvador, but plums, I did. So I walked up to the store, I bought a bunch of prunes, came home, ate every last one, and saved their pits. Oh yes. Now, the pits of the plum or the prune house a fragrant oil. So I had to figure out how to burn them and collect the ash with the oil still inside, right? So, first I tried lighting a pit using a match. That did not work. Then I tried holding a fork with a pit on it over a match. That kind of worked, but I could tell it was going to take a long time, and I was impatient. But finally, I found that I could put a spoon on the burner of the stove with a pit inside of it, light the flame, and then stand at the far side of the room and watch and wait. After I burnt all the pits in this manner, I put them all into a cup. I took the wooden butt of a knife and crushed them until I had a handful of ash. Next, the recipe called for gum arabic. Gum arabic is an edible binding agent. I couldn't find that in the stores and was not going to wait to order from the internet. But I thought about something I had been eating in Salvador, something called goma. Goma is like flour, but it's made from the manioc plant, not the wheat plant. I looked it up and I saw that goma means gum in Portuguese. So I decided to try it as a substitute. I mixed equal parts of the goma and the ash, put that mixture into a cup, put the cup into a cabinet overnight. In the morning, the mixture had hardened as it was supposed to. Took my thumb, made a dimple in the surface, added a few drops of water, and then I went into my bedroom and grabbed the pink feather I had found on the ground on one of my many visits to the Salvador Zoo. I dipped the feather in, and lo and behold, I wrote using this ink I had just made. Now, I tell this story because what we are looking at here is something called bark cloth. And that is the first 15 minutes of our piece, Ink. Thank you.